Hey everyone, I'm Marty Irby here, a director at OCM and live in Washington, D.C. And I guess the best way to put this is I'm the only person that lives in Washington, D.C. that is actively working to pass the Opportunities for Fairness in Farming Act to bring transparency and accountability to the checkoff issue. We've been working with OCM. Mike comes up frequently from Pennsylvania, and a lot of people come in town, but I'm there every day and I see what's going on, a lot of things behind the scenes that people don't see. And so what I wanted to do is kind of just give you a little brief history of where we've been and where we're going with the Opportunities for Fairness in Farming Act, because I hope or believe everyone here pretty much knows what the checkoffs are, what the issues are, and what the problems are. And if not, Dave Wright can tell you about that. So the Opportunities for Fairness in Farming Act was introduced first in 2016. It was before the next farm bill that was coming in the 115th Congress. So this was the 114th Congress that this legislation was first introduced. It was in the fall of that year. Senators Mike Lee and Cory Booker introduced it, and it didn't have a very good name. I can't even remember what the name of the bill was, but we came up with a better name going into the Farm Bill year, which was the Opportunities for Fairness in Farming, or OFF Act. And this was really kind of in response to something that had occurred in the previous Farm Bill in 2012. Many of you may recall that there was a Senate Agriculture Committee amendment that was filed by Senator Jim DeMint from South Carolina at the time. And there was a party line vote to basically make the checkoffs voluntary. It went far greater, it extended far greater than what the OFF Act does. And even Senator Mitch McConnell voted for it. It was all Republicans that voted for that committee amendment, and it failed primarily because Debbie Stabenow, who is now the Ag Committee chair, was against it, and the Democrats voted against it. And this has kind of been all over the place. The votes on this issue are not very consistent. And so from that point forward, I started working on this issue in Congress in 2013 when I started working on Capitol Hill. So I'm only 9 years into the checkoff issue and probably don't know as much as everyone here, but I know this bill and I know the situation that we're in, and I know the politics of it, and I know where Congress is. And going into the next year, the next Congress, the 118th Congress that will start in January of 2023, we're going to be amidst a farm bill, and we're going to have another opportunity to put a dent in this and hopefully get something done. The last time when this went through the whole process in the farm bill in 2017 and 18, so we had the 2012 committee amendment, then we had a few years of a break because that farm bill closed out. We brought the new legislation in the fall of 2016, and we set the stage for the introduction of the OFF Act in early 2017 by Senators Mike Lee, Senator Cory Booker, Senator Rand Paul, and Senator Elizabeth Warren, 4 people who you will probably never hear their names together on anything again. In that Congress, we also had a congressman who was newly elected that had defeated the sitting majority leader, Eric Cantor, in the House. It was, some people called it a fluke, whatever you want to call it. He was there for a few years, Mr. Dave Bratt, who was terrific on this issue, and he and Dina Titus from Nevada introduced the House bill. We actually did something I've never seen before and I've never seen since, and we introduced both bills on the same day in both chambers with Democrats and Republicans with identical language. Not one letter was different. I've never seen that happen before on any issue that I've worked on. We had a great showing. We had a huge event there. Senator Lee came and spoke about the issue in person. Senator Booker came and spoke about the issue in person. We had a packed room there in the Capitol Visitor Center. I think Mike Weaver was there that I remember for sure. And we talked to Senator Cruz that day too about the issue. And so that really set the stage for the Farm Bill. And when you're talking about the Farm Bill, on the House side, there are always a ton of amendments that people offer, very few that get through. And on the Senate, even fewer. So what happened in 2018, which is the second year of that Congress, when they really got into the meat of the Farm Bill was brought up in the House for a vote, and the issue over the food stamps and all of that sort of thing with SNAPs brought the Farm Bill down, failed the House vote. And so they brought it back up a few weeks later. We had Congressman Dave Bratt file the checkoff legislation as an amendment to the Farm Bill, along with Dina Titus and Earl Blumenauer. And quite honestly, we did not expect it to get to the House floor for a vote. We thought it was really something that was more to set the stage for the Senate, and that's where our play was, because that's where we were the strongest, that's where we had the leaders who were really strong, and that's where it was more socialized. But the chairman of the Rules Committee, Pete Sessions from Texas, led it through, and that's thanks to Mike Conway, who at the time was Ag Committee Chairman. And we were gonna have a vote. And then something occurred that we did not expect, and the Democrats all started just leaving town. Nancy Pelosi told the Democrats, do not make the Farm Bill better. I want the Farm Bill to fail, because she wasn't getting what she wanted with the food stamp issue. So the Democrats all left, and we were losing a ton of votes that we knew we had. And so the sponsor, Dave Bratt, actually pulled the amendment, and we didn't let it go to a vote because we didn't want it to fail going into the Senate. But we made a big statement. And Big Ag and all the folks with the checkoffs, specifically in CBA, I think they had their hair on fire because they never expected that. We had a great, what they call Dear Colleague, that was sent out to all the House members. And we actually used NCBA's email where they were lobbying Congress against the checkoff amendment. And we said, the very email in your inbox is what we're trying to stop. We're trying to prevent these dollars from being utilized against farmers in lobbying. They're not supposed to utilize these dollars for lobbying. It's illegal. So the OFF Act actually creates a system of transparency, checks and balances, and accountability to open the books up where you all can see where your money's going. We've had a lawsuit with OCM that was worked on for I don't know how many years, and I think we got 12,000 pages of documents, and about 11,500 of them were redacted. So we got nothing. That really didn't lead anywhere, put some more pressure on the issue, and it gave us a good talking point to say that we had been through that process in Congress, but we still had to face an uphill battle because it was just me and Joe Maxwell there on the day that these votes occurred. Big Ag and the folks at NCBA, I think they had 15 or 20 lobbyists that I saw literally lined up out the door of the Ag Committee Chairman's office. And we were in line with them, but we weren't the last ones in line. So sometimes you have to be the last ones in line if you really want to get it through. When we got to the Senate on that legislation, we knew we were in a good stage there. And I have to say, Mike Lee stood up more than I had ever seen anybody on an issue. And he basically said, I'm going to stop the Farm Bill if you don't allow this amendment, Senator McConnell. And the Republicans were in the majority. And so the OFF Act was one of 3 amendments that was allowed a vote in 2018 going into the Farm Bill in the US Senate. And we lost the vote, but we were scrambling. We didn't have much help. We had a lot of people calling. We had a lot of people writing in letters. And the vote that actually went down, let me do my math here, I made a lot of notes. It was 57 to 38 with 5 people not voting. I'm going to tell you a few little statistics here about what happened. There were, of the senators, the thing that was very interesting about this is we really couldn't figure out why some senators voted the way they did and some didn't. There was no party alignment. It was completely bipartisan. Of the people that voted yes, 13 were Republicans, 25 were Democrats. If you look at the states that had both of their senators vote yes in support of the amendment, there were 7. There were Rhode Island, New Mexico, New Jersey, Nevada, Maryland, Hawaii, and Connecticut. If you look at the states that had both of their senators vote no, they were Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Kansas, and I could name them all, but you probably all could too. So half of the US Senate, roughly half of the US Senate, had a split between the senators from the same state. This is not something that really happens very often. It might be, if it's something pretty insignificant and people are just going and casting a vote because their buddy, they're trying to help a friend or something like that. That was not the case here. I really truly believe, number one, the senators that voted our way were the ones that heard from their people and they heard from them the loudest. And number two, I think there were a lot of people that were confused and really didn't understand the issue. I had several offices call me, and Joe did too. They told us, please explain this to us, because in CBA and the other checkoffs, in PPC, they were telling them that we were trying to make the checkoffs voluntary and we were trying to take dollars away from the checkoffs. That is not what we were trying to do. The OFF Act does not touch $1. All it does is create a system of transparency, accountability, checks and balances, and it prohibits anti-competitive practices. There's another bill, the Voluntary Checkoff Act, that Senator Lee and Senator Paul have introduced consistently that really hasn't gotten much support, honestly. Of course, we support it. I'm sure many people here do. but it just hasn't gotten the momentum that the OFF Act has. So I think that confusion hurt us on that vote, but we learned some very valuable lessons. So now the last two farm bills, we've had some sort of a vote on the checkoff issue, and we want to make it a priority for this upcoming farm bill that will occur in 2022 and 2023. And we're going to have to bring a lot of people together to do it. We're probably going to have to work with people we don't like and people that don't like us, but we're going to be in the trenches together, and we're going to be working to try to get this done. The bill now in this Congress that we're in, the 117th Congress, has Senator Lee, of course, as the leader, with Booker, Paul, Warren, and now Senator Gillibrand from New York. She's a newcomer to the bill as a co-sponsor. And then on the House side, we have Dina Titus, as I mentioned earlier, from Nevada, and a newcomer from the Republican Party in the House, Nancy Mace from South Carolina, that many of you guys met here last year in Washington, D.C. with me. She is a really true champion, just like Senator Lee. She is not afraid of anybody. She is not afraid to make people mad, and she is not afraid to go against the grain. I do feel, based on the politics of things, that she'll probably be the lead of the bill in the House in the next Congress. And one of the things that's going to be very important is right now she's the ranking member of one of the government oversight and reform subcommittees. And she would be, if the House flips to the Republican side, she would be the chair of one of those subcommittees. And that's going to be very valuable to us because this has never been brought up in government and oversight and reform. And I talked to her about it at length last Friday. I talked to her probably for an hour about it. So I think we can see some action there that will also help push the Ag Committee and corner the Ag Committee if they're not doing anything about it. Now, going into the next Congress, I know Mike Eby, at least, and I have a good friend, GT, Glenn Thompson from Pennsylvania. I don't know that he's going to be with us on this issue. I know he's very much aware of the issue, and I think that he might be one who would at least be willing to consider having it heard in a hearing or brought up in a hearing. Could potentially allow an amendment based on who's supporting and who's co-sponsoring it. So we stand a chance. And if we bring people together in this next 2 years, we can do more than we've ever been able to do. I'm glad to answer any questions. I don't want to extend my time because we have 4 of us up here. I just wanted to give you guys the lay of the land, where we are, what we have in front of us. And remember this, organizations that support this legislation include 250,000 farmers from across the country. That says a lot more than anything. And when you have organizations that are over on the far left with the animal groups sometimes and some of the progressive groups, and you have the Heritage Foundation and R Street supporting the same legislation, that speaks volumes. And that's what we have to win. And I think we stand a good shot at winning in this next Congress. So thank you.
Thanks, Marty. My name is Mike Schultz. I'm from Northwest Kansas, cow-calf producer. I chair the RCAF Cool Committee, so I've been kind of involved from day one on this. I actually founded the Kansas Cattlemen Association and helped work with the guys at RCAF early on. I work now with the board of directors here at OCM. Our big issue has been mandatory country of origin labeling. I've got a flyer here. I was going to have some slides, but they didn't get put up. But there's some flyers over there on where I was setting, be available for you guys to look at. MCOOL is a big deal. It's one of the biggest. I'm not sure now. After all the talk today, but I believe 2 things need to happen in this industry, especially in the cattle industry, is a ban on packer ownership, feeding or control, and the second one would be mandatory country of origin labeling. I believe those are pretty strong points. I want to make people aware. I'll just kind of go through my presentation here a little bit, and then you guys can follow up and look at this as you get time. The WTO seems to be the big fish in the pan. Oh, excuse me. The WTO seems to be the big problem. Everybody we talked to when we were in DC last year, the WTO issue came up. And everybody's quite aware it was $1 billion trade threat. Now that sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it? Well, as a reference, I want to kind of share with you guys a little bit. In 2015, when we had mandatory COOL implemented, we had about $78 billion in cattle traded. In 2016, we went down to 63 billion. In 2014, after the full, earlier in 2014, the full implementation at $82 billion of cattle trade. And after they killed MCOOL, we lost about $20 billion in revenue for rural America. Dave and I and the OCM board went through all this a year ago in DC to tell the Congress people about how much money this thing costs us. That was $1 billion trade threat. And ever since then, every year we've lost over $20 billion. So it would be easier to pay the $1 billion. And we could have arbitrated the case. Senator Pat Roberts, who chaired the Ag Committee at the time, said the Ag Committee chose not to arbitrate it. We needed to arbitrate the case. We could have won it. We would not allow us to sit on the panel, and therefore we walked away and got kicked in the knee and took our beating. There's a paper out called The Myths and Facts of Mandatory Country of Origin Labeling. I've got a copy of it. I'll make it available for Mike, and we'll try to get some of this stuff put on the website, I hope, so that you guys can follow up and see some of these slide presentations. The WTO had no standing in that deal other than they chose to rule against it. It didn't have any teeth. Our Constitution was proven earlier, the appellate court in 2014, AMI versus USDA, were upheld the constitutional lawfulness of mandatory country of origin for beef. And we walked away from that with a 3-member panel that was corrupt as hell. And we should have won that. So we're still working on mandatory cool. Hopefully it'll come back. Along with cool, during the debate, the WTO, the Canadians claimed they were abused. We've got charts, and it's in my flyer over there. The Canadian market followed, almost mirrored the United States cattle industry market. As our prices went up, theirs followed. When they defeated cool, their prices went down. The people in Alberta that I've talked to, I asked them, what happened to cattle market? Well, it collapsed. US is US cattle set. We set the price for the US cattle industry and the world market, basically. So now what we're up against is we got a Brazilian import coming in from JBS and Marfrig. The imports last year were up 153% from Brazil. So recently, RCAP published a paper out from USDA data for the last 20 years, basically 20 years, that shows every time the cattle market started to move, increased imports came into the country to kill the market. I've got that slide presentation, and it's over there in the flyers, and I'll be glad to share it with you. So every time the market moved up, imports followed. As imports come in, they went down. By telling you that, I don't want to share with you a thing that happened in 1998. There was a US ITC trade case in Washington, D.C. over live cattle imports from Canada and Mexico. It was stated in page 28 through 31 that a small supply of imports can dramatically affect the domestic cattle market, even as little as 5%. 5%. Remember that number. You know the amount of cattle we import from Canada? 74%. What did they say the number was that could dramatically affect the market? 5. That's just one country. And we're getting 153% imports from Brazil right now. So you want to pay attention to its effects on what our market is, what we receive as producers up here. So we know that goes on. We know we could have beat the WTO had we arbitrated it. We need to get Congress to fix it. We have offered solutions to defeat the WTO ruling and how we can address it. So it's in a compliance method right then. We've got that available for people. We hope they take that forward and would utilize it. But believe me, my questions today to some of the speakers about the fear of retaliation is real. They don't want to do it. The Packers almost have more power than the government. They've taken our money to do it. And so we have to watch that. I was going to tell you here in $20 billion loss. I keep trying to tell people about imports, and those things really concern me, especially when they're unmarked. So I tell people, you show me one producer that has ever received a check for beef exports for a pound of beef or a bushel of grain for a penny or more. Show me and find me one producer that's ever received a check for anything export. You capture nothing. The corporation captures it all. You as a producer are damaged by imports and you get nothing for exports. But what did the major cattle organization tell us about exported beef sales? They're up. Good. Who's it benefit? Dave and I and Taylor, we're getting the same market whether we do or not. we don't provide enough beef to meet the U.S. consumers' demand. We have to import some. We just don't need to flood the market with imports. And I think right now we're going to see a real crisis in the cattle industry and the beef industry because of the declining cattle. We've got a drought going on. We got liquidation going on at record levels. You know, when you start reading about economists in the Drovers magazine, you know, which is a newspaper deal that needs to be in the bathroom, those things are terrible. And now they're talking about it. Just like when mandatory cool was in effect, they said we had 3 good years of the market. Remember 2018, life was going to be good. It'd never go bad again. The market was going to keep coming up. And then they threw away everything and it just went in the tank. So our market is diminished. I mean, we're getting $1.37, 36 for cattle. That sounds like a lot of money. I also paid, I mean, in reality here, like $4.93, $5.13 for fuel. For example, a tractor that I have, a fairly big front wheel assist tractor, you fill up 2/3 of the tank and it's $600, one tank full. And so, you know, the cost that Dave has with 800 cows and Taylor with 300 or 400 cows, you can imagine what it costs to run an operation. And you can't do it for free like myself. But, you know, feeding cattle is a good deal. We try to do all these things to make it work. When mandatory cool comes along, people talk about ownership, you know, go ahead and feed them, slaughter them, sell them to retail. That all sounds good. I'm a little concerned at times because the people say, well, you're just whining. Why don't you retain the ownership all the way? And we do that. I sell cattle to consumers direct. But as I tell people, did they build their house? Did they build the tires on their car? Did they build their car? Do you build the electrical wiring? There's things in the scales of efficiency you hire other people to do. I'm a cow-calf producer. I choose to hire a packer to do that on the other side, somebody to slaughter my cattle. I'm not a specialist at it. They are. So you utilize where you can. I think those are the 2 big things though, is mandatory cool, ban on packer ownership. They go hand in hand. If you guys have other questions as we go through, this MCOOL bill is going to be brought up here hopefully sometime this year, is a Senate Bill 2716 and House Bill 7291 for mandatory country of origin labeling. Hopefully we can get those passed. You guys, we fight a big fight. The meat packer cartel is huge. And the lobbying deal, as they've already told us, they're hiring the very best. Don't trust the government of Brazil that they're not throwing more money at this deal. They own those 2 companies. I hope you guys understand that. That's Brazil money. I have a real problem, and I'm getting off the track on the country board of labeling, but with foreign government intervention in the United States with government money. That bothers me. So with that, I'll wait until the end. If you have questions on mandatory cool, where we're at, we'll try to answer them. I'll pass this off to Taylor.
So, we go next. Well, first I gotta start. Mike, really? Drovers in the bathroom? I'm thinking maybe like the outhouse instead, because I don't want to flush it down the toilet. You know? Sorry, I couldn't pass that one out. But anyway, they gave me the Packers and Stockyard Act, and I know just enough about the Packers and Stockyard Act to be dangerous. So I just took a little different approach to this. We all understand the Packers and Stockyard Act was to address concentration and address competitive markets, and I'm sure most of us have heard and studied that over the years. And I wrote a pile of notes, so if you just bear with me for a second. Pete, you did a great job of explaining how we got here today with the Packers Stockyard. But I'll just start at the beginning. Chris Young, I thought, was quite interesting with the AAMP. That's what, I mean, why haven't I heard of that organization before? Probably because they don't get checkoff dollars. Wonder why, you know, because it looks to me like they're addressing this problem with Packers Stockyard Act. He made it clear that ban on packer ownership would be a great idea, which we have that law in Nebraska on the books. Thanks to Cap Dirks and I think Warren Smith. I think he was around when it got passed. Andy Green, he made a point, I kind of made a point to him at the time we were having a discussion. You move Packers' heat in, but they moved Packers' Stockyard Act over to AMS. That doesn't make sense unless you want to weaken Packers' Stockyard Act, because it is an act of Congress. AMS is not so much. Packers' Stockyard Act can regulate interstate and foreign commerce. That's talking about country of origin labeling, that's talking about imports, and then at the end it says, and other purposes. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I know how lawyers think. Other purposes is just like the Pandora's box. Funny how we put it under an agency, so we can't find anybody to really stretch and take the Packers and Stockyard Act, let it stretch its arms out to see what it really is like. But I said to Andy afterwards, he's sitting on probably one of the most powerful committees in Washington, D.C. right now, if he will exercise those rights. And if you listen to him, he said he will talk to the secretary, or he will talk to the Secretary of Agriculture about that. And I approached him out in the hallway. I wish he'd left, because he would have left, because I was going to point this out. The Secretary of Agriculture is an appointed position by the president. An act of Congress is a lot stronger than Secretary of Agriculture, because it's from Congress. So that's something that I found quite interesting today. David Smith, I really enjoyed his presentation. I really did, about how he just proved the myth that everyone says that we can't do it. But yet they do it every week in their grocery stores. They have their store brands and they have everybody else's brands, and it's the same commodity. You know, just raised or grown differently. I'll come back to Scott. You know, here, Gary, I like you, Scott, I like Gary. The thing I saw with Gary was he was basically talking about voluntary country of origin. We've got that. We've got hundreds of labels out there that want to be voluntary country of origin labeling. The question we need is mandatory. So his idea is a fine idea, but we've seen all the RCAF years, how many have we seen come and go? You know, voluntary 100%. You know, but you got to keep pushing it. I talked about Pete Moss, not the disco singer, right? So anyway, concentration, and she took it to the next level, but we all know that. But I want to go back to Scott. Scott, you made a very good point that I think we need to really soak in and think about. Go around the Packers. Go around the Packers. Now, as some of you know, I'm running for an office in Nebraska, and I used to be on the school board president and that kind of stuff. But what you learn real quick is you can't get bogged down by someone or something. Ask Santa Ana. If you just went around the Alamo, Texas and California would probably still be part of Mexico. But instead, the arrogance of saying, I'm going to stand here and win, cost me. Scott's got a better idea. He's got I like his idea. We can argue and fight about all things we've been talking about all afternoon, but he's saying, go around them. Just go around them. You'll be able to catch them in the way back. Santa Ana could have caught them on the way back. But you go around them and you establish what you want and you make that work, then they're chasing you. They got to chase you in the courts. They got to chase you everywhere you go. You just keep going around them. I like that, Scott. I like that. So that's my talk on Packers and Stockyard Act. It was all very informational. I enjoyed the whole thing.
Thanks, Dennis. It's my cousin Dave. You can see the family resemblance. Well, I did a little paper a while back called Buy American and the Beef Producer. Because when the Biden administration came on the scene, they were very strong. By God, we're going to buy American. And in a sense, the whole conference today and the conferences I'll attend next week and last year are all about Buy American, our country of origin labeling, America first, that whole deal. Well, one of the things, and I also want to second what Dave said about what's going on in Oklahoma and Scott. It's choose your battles. I don't want to give up lobbying and the great work that Marty's doing, but we have ridden that horse hard and put him away with. But we still got to keep that fight up. In the meantime, what do? So like we all do in our business, what's plan B? Plan B is what they're doing in Oklahoma. They're buying America. They're not worrying about lobbying. They've chosen their battle and they're winning it. And I've got some good advice from him. He said, go small first, baby steps. So that's one of the take-home messages. But in that take-home message is not take the pressure off our elected officials. We have to come at them from both angles. Perhaps, and this is the hardest thing I've ever tried to do, is organize the Cowboys. And I've been trying to do that for years. But AWG gave us a tool that we've never had. If you guys can get it in a box, we can sell it. Nobody's ever told us that. They've told us it's got to all be X, it's all got to be Y, or it's got to be Z. He says, we can do X, Y, Z, guys. You just get it in a box. Now, I'm excited about that, but I'm not irrationally exuberant because it still requires us to organize the Cowboys. And so in my neighborhood, I've been at this a while. Here comes Haynes again. He always wants to fight. I don't ever want to fight. I've never picked a fight. But if somebody picks a fight in your yard, you're the only one that can't come to your senses and go home. You have a fight, and they picked a fight in our yard. And so what I want everybody to lead with, encourage your producers in your neighborhood to look at what they've done in Oklahoma, because they did it. And they're willing to help you learn how to do it. So we need to work on that while we keep the pressure on our politicians. The other caveat I learned from board member Butcher, if this thing we're doing starts to work like it is in Oklahoma, somehow the big four has to come after us. And they've already started because the farm bill is on the horizon with better calf prices. So I want those better calf prices, but they're not gonna buy me off of this quest. You see what I mean? You can't let them buy us off of the quest. But I'm gonna fight to do what they're doing in Oklahoma and keep the pressure on my electeds to do the right thing. You have to do that, and you have to vote, even if you think your vote doesn't count, vote. Vote your conscience, do your homework first. Now, back to Buy American and the producer. That's a thing that's easy to sell, but we don't communicate with the consumer well enough. And I'm at a loss as to how to complain louder to the consumer. So we have to put our heads together and figure out, what do you say in your sound bites when you're talking to the newspaper or the radio or the TV, so that you get the consumer's attention about the peril that they're in with imports. Imports are okay if we need them. We need them a little bit, not as much as the graphs show. The reason there's room for imports is because of downward pressure on our commodity prices, on our beef prices, artificially put there by the chokehold that Diana Moss showed us. So if the prices are there, if the return on investment and effort is there, the American cattle producer will come back. We can produce more beef than is consumed if we can cover our costs and be in business another year. And we're happy to do that. But when your costs outstrip what you're bringing home, at some point, you're out of business, whether you want to be or not. So better prices come from what they're doing in Oklahoma, and it's local, and it's very hard for the big boys to get into that. But you need commitment from your cowboys, and you need to work with your feeders and processors. Small family feeders have just about disappeared from our country. Geez, trying to find one is like prospecting for gold. But if we get this ball rolling in each community, we can get the small feeders back. Some of us may have to invest in that to help them get going again. There's still farmers in the area, but they can't compete with 500,000 head feedlot there in Greeley, Colorado. So they have to have some help from us, and then now we're getting help from them if they're in business. So really, I want to thank you all for coming. And I want to thank the committee that put this together. Because these conferences are nerve-wracking and difficult. Jerica Brumbaugh, Deborah Mills, our directors, Tom Dirks, Marty Irby, Bon Meyer, our president, Fred Stokes, our senior advisor, and also unsung quiet hero, Pat Krager. Thank you so much, Pat. And I thank you all for coming. God be with us all.